Karayan stands alone in the dim underground arena, her composed face tightening with suspicion as she studies the aftermath of the protagonist's escape. She silently weighs the possibility that Frostfall is fake, and the strain of her unstable appraisal skill leaves her visibly unsettled. Karayan remains motionless for a beat, then narrows her eyes as if replaying the earlier appraisal in her mind. Her expression shifts from certainty to controlled unease, suggesting that her incomplete seeker's eye may have misread the object she examined. Karayan's gaze drifts toward the arena exit as the realization settles in more firmly. She stands with measured composure, but the tension in her posture reveals that the fake Frostfall and her unreliable skill have become a serious concern. Karayan remains still for a brief moment, her expression tightening as she reconsiders the unstable appraisal skill and the confusion it may have caused. She lowers her gaze, composed but unsettled, as the earlier certainty gives way to a more cautious, uneasy calculation. Her thoughts turn away from the appraisal and toward the protagonist's departure, and her tension softens into a quiet, distant focus. She lifts her chin slightly, as if accepting that she will not see him again soon, while the throbbing silence of the arena presses around her. At last, Karayan settles into a restrained, thoughtful stillness, her unstable confidence replaced by quiet acceptance. She holds her posture with practiced composure, but the slight tension in her face suggests she is already preparing for the next move elsewhere. Karayan reaches the city center and slows to a measured stop, her expression tightening as she surveys the damp streets. The illegal atmosphere and the shabby crowd confirm her suspicion that Dark City Dungard remains firmly under guild control. She resumes walking with careful steps, keeping her gaze low as drugged-looking passers-by stagger past her. Their vacant grins and mismatched prosthetics make the street feel even more sinister, and her calm face hardens with wary appraisal. Karayan pauses again, taking in the city's criminal density and the oppressive dampness that clings to every wall. Her composed face shows controlled unease as she recognizes the place as the Ruin Merchant Guild's base of power. She turns her head toward the hotel district, her attention sharpening as she spots the rare upscale lodging standing apart from the surrounding decay. The contrast draws a faint, calculating focus into her eyes. Karayan advances toward the hotel with steady, deliberate steps, her posture regaining confidence as she approaches the safer district. The city's grime remains behind her, but her expression settles into focused resolve. She comes to a final halt near the hotel approach, her gaze fixed ahead as if already planning her next move. The city around her stays dim and hostile, but her controlled expression suggests she has accepted its dangers. Karayan slows to a stop before the hotel facade, her composed expression tightening with quiet appraisal as she studies the rare elegance of the building. The contrast with the lawless city around it leaves her visibly alert, as if measuring how much power must stand behind such order. She lifts her gaze toward the sign and lets the thought settle that this city has already been seized by the Ruin Merchant Guild. Her expression remains controlled, but the faint narrowing of her eyes suggests she is weighing Karayan's reach and the danger hidden beneath the hotel's luxury. After a brief pause, she shifts her weight forward and steps closer to the entrance, accepting the hotel as a rare safe harbor in a city ruled by criminals. Her posture stays elegant, yet her guarded focus shows she does not trust the peace for long. She reaches the threshold and pauses again, the building's neat exterior confirming that this lodging is unlike the shabby structures surrounding it. Her face stays composed, but the slight tension in her jaw reveals how carefully she is reading the city's power balance. She glances once more at the sign reading Ruin's Royal Stay, then lowers her gaze as if deciding to enter and rest despite the city's corruption. The controlled calm on her face suggests confidence, but her stillness carries the weight of a broker who knows who truly rules here. Karayan finally moves toward the entrance with measured steps, her expression settling into quiet certainty as she prepares to pass into the hotel's protected interior. The scene closes on her poised figure, framed by luxury that stands defiantly inside a lawless city. Karayan enters the polished lobby with a composed, tired expression, then places her payment at the counter and secures a room without hesitation. Her relief is restrained, but the urgency in her posture shows she wants rest immediately after the long day. After booking the room, Karayan follows the staff's guidance into the hallway, her pace measured and efficient despite her exhaustion. She keeps her attention forward, accepting the hotel's security and service as the practical answer to her immediate need for rest. Karayan climbs the stairs behind the staff, continuing toward the guest room with quiet determination. Her fatigue remains visible, but she keeps moving steadily, trusting the hotel's guidance to carry her the last distance to safety. Karayan reaches the guest room at last, her shoulders loosening as the staff's polite farewell fades behind the closed door. Her trembling legs betray the strain of the climb, and relief softens her composed expression as she turns toward the bed with urgent exhaustion. She closes the door behind her with a firm motion, sealing off the hallway and leaving the room quiet. The finality of the latch seems to relieve release the last of her restraint, and she steps forward with a wavering but determined posture toward the bed. Karayan crosses the room and lets her exhausted body give way, collapsing onto the blanket in one heavy motion. The mattress absorbs her weight, and the sudden comfort draws a faint, relieved breath from her as fatigue overtakes her guarded composure. After a brief pause, Karayan buries her face into the pillow and slowly rolls onto her side. Her breathing settles, and the tension in her posture drains away as the room's quiet safety finally reaches her. Night deepens outside the window while Karayan remains still in the bed, fully surrendered to rest. The darkened sky confirms the day's end, and her exhausted body finally settles into the first comfort she has felt since arriving in this world. Karayan remains asleep or near sleep as the room grows quieter, her breathing even and her posture fully relaxed. The long day has ended, and the stillness around her underscores the rare sense of safety she has finally found. Lying on her side in the bed, Karayan lets the realization settle with quiet relief and lingering disbelief. She stares into the dim room, thinking of surviving the tutorial, killing Barber, and taking the feather sword and money, while her exhausted body stays motionless beneath the blanket. Still lying in the same position, Karayan's expression tightens with sober caution as she weighs how close each victory came to death. Her eyes remain open, and the stillness of the room sharpens her awareness that one wrong move in the tutorial or against Barber would have ended everything. Karayan finally exhales and closes her eyes for a moment, the thought of future danger lingering even as gratitude steadies her. She remains alone in the quiet hotel room, resting in the safety she bought with Karayan's money, while the memory of survival keeps her resolve intact. Karayan lies still on the bed, her calm face tightening as she replays Barber's violence and the underground arena meeting in her mind. The comfort of the room feels fragile to her, and her fingers rest motionless beside her torso as worry settles in. Her eyes open again, and she stares into the dim room with a guarded expression, thinking that dangers like today will keep returning in this cursed world. The stillness around her makes the fear feel sharper, even as she remains physically composed. Karayan's expression settles into sober resolve as she accepts that survival will require enduring more threats ahead. She remains motionless in the safe room, but the unease in her eyes shows that the day's memories have not left her. At dawn, Karayan leaves the hotel with a composed but wary expression, her long dark hair falling neatly over her polished merchant attire. She steps into the dim street alone, already turning her thoughts toward the next danger and the need to survive by becoming stronger. She continues along the city streets at an unhurried pace, replaying last night's decision and narrowing her focus to one conclusion: she must grow stronger. Her expression tightens with quiet determination as the lawless city presses around her. As she keeps walking, Karayan's resolve hardens into a practical plan, and she accepts that relying only on the soul of the swordmaster is too dangerous. Her posture stays steady, but her face shows a sharper, more serious focus than before. Karayan walks through the dim city street with a measured pace, her calculating expression tightening as she weighs the skill's 0.01 second duration against the danger of an unknown crisis. She keeps her gaze forward, unsettled by how little room that brief activation leaves for error. Without breaking stride, Karayan's expression turns more severe as she considers the skill's practical cooldown, realizing that her tiny mana pool has turned an on-off ability into something far less reliable. The thought of depending on it for survival leaves her visibly frustrated and wary. Karayan's pace slows for a moment as she notices her MP still reads 0 even after a night's rest, and her annoyance sharpens into disbelief. She silently questions why recovery has not begun, her focus fixed on the problem rather than the city around her. Karayan's irritation eases into wary focus as she notices the mana display change at last. She reasons that the system can be manipulated through simple recovery, yet the lingering level readout leaves her unsettled and suspicious of any game-like promise. She lifts her gaze toward the hovering level window, and her expression tightens when it remains unchanged. The realization settles that defeating a powerful enemy has not produced any growth, forcing her to accept that the system only reflects status rather than granting advancement. Karayan lowers her chin, now fully convinced that future strength must come from deliberate effort rather than automatic rewards. Her expression hardens into calculation as she prepares to pursue another method of growth in the lawless city. Karayan stands motionless in the dim street, her calculating expression hardening as she concludes that reality will not reward her with game-like growth. She lowers her gaze from the invisible status display and resolves to seek strength through another path, her thoughts settling on sacred pieces as the first viable answer. Karayan's eyes sharpen with intent as she traces the logic of the world's setting and rejects leveling up as a path to power. She turns her attention inward, deciding that she must pursue strength by means that fit this harsh continent, and the idea of sacred pieces becomes the first concrete step in her plan. Karayan settles on the memory of sacred pieces as remnants of ancient gods scattered across the continent, and her expression turns purposeful rather than doubtful. She stands ready to act on that knowledge, treating the fragment as the first route toward real power in a world that refuses easy advancement. Karayan stands motionless in the dim street, her calculating gaze narrowing as she frames sacred pieces as rewards from trials. She dismisses ordinary growth, and a cool, practical resolve settles over her face as she decides that strength must be taken by another route. Karayan's expression hardens with quiet ambition as she concludes that her weak body cannot survive trial hunting alone. She settles on the idea of being carried, turning the absurd phrase into a coldly efficient plan to recruit a powerful NPC and claim the rewards for herself. Adelia steps into view in the alley, her cautious posture revealing that she has been the intended target all along. She halts with tense anticipation, then leans forward slightly as if ready to follow the protagonist's lead, her resolve returning after the earlier hesitation. Karayan keeps her composure in the dim alley as she weighs the problem of finding a reliable carrier for the trials. Her calculating gaze sharpens, and her hand settles near her coat trim, the thought of a suitable target already forming into a practical plan. She turns the idea over with quiet certainty, deciding that a strong follower would solve the burden of trial clearing. Her expression remains cool, but the tension in her jaw shows how carefully she is measuring risk against reward. A subtle pause follows as she recognizes that the target has already been trailing her since the previous day. Own narrow with interest rather than alarm, and she shifts her weight forward, ready to confront the follower on her own terms. Adelia appears at the far end of the alley, having followed the protagonist into the narrow passage. She slows to a halt, her guarded expression revealing both caution and determination as she faces the man she has been tracking since yesterday. She listens in silence as the confrontation settles into a tense pause, then tightens her grip on the sword at her side. Her resolve flickers, but she keeps her stance, unwilling to abandon the chance to grow stronger. At the end of the exchange, she remains frozen in place, startled by the unexpected acceptance and the promise of a nearby training ground. Her posture loosens only slightly as she prepares to follow, relief and disbelief mixing in her expression. Adelia stands motionless in the narrow alley, her surprise hardening into wary focus as she faces the unseen speaker. The silence breaks her hesitation, and she shifts her weight forward, ready to reveal herself. Adelia takes a cautious step deeper into the alley, her expression sharpening as she commits to the confrontation. Her posture remains proud despite the darkness, and her gaze fixes straight ahead with a lion-like intensity. She stops at the edge of the speaker's reach, her breathing controlled as she studies the darkness ahead. The tension in her jaw eases only slightly, replaced by a guarded resolve to answer the challenge. Adelia's caution gives way to recognition as she realizes the figure before her is the one she has been tracking. Her eyes widen a fraction, and her body tightens with the shock of finally seeing him clearly. She listens as the unseen man speaks, and her guarded expression shifts into startled uncertainty. Adelia's shoulders stiffen, but she does not retreat, holding her ground in the alley's cramped darkness. Adelia absorbs the warning about the sword's lethal intent, and fear flickers across her face before she reins it in. She steadies herself, determined not to yield despite the pressure pressing down on her. Adelia hesitates at the life or death question, her confidence wavering as she weighs revenge against survival. The pause stretches, and her mouth parts as if to answer, but no words come immediately. Adelia flinches when the man cuts her off and turns away, leaving her stunned by the abrupt dismissal. She remains rooted in place, then gathers herself and prepares to follow the direction he has given her. Adelia remained frozen in the alley, her fear giving way to a stunned, searching focus as she heard her name spoken with certainty. The recognition unsettled her, yet her pride kept her shoulders squared while she studied the man who had turned back toward her. Her expression tightened as she absorbed the judgment that she was not among the continent's strongest, but the mention of her growth potential struck deeper. Adelia's gaze sharpened with restrained ambition, and her breathing steadied as she silently measured the value of being chosen for what she could become. Adelia's attention shifted from self-doubt to resolve as she listened to the cold challenge implied by the man's words. She held her ground, visibly torn between caution and the desire to seize the chance before her jaw set with disciplined frustration. When the man warned that his sword only took lives, Adelia's confidence faltered. Adelia's hesitation deepened into alarm as the man cut her off and turned away, leaving her with no immediate answer. She stood motionless for a beat, then her posture slackened in disbelief, as if the chance she wanted had slipped beyond reach. Adelia finally reacted to the unexpected call to follow, her stunned silence breaking into urgent relief. She straightened at once, ready to move after the man and accept the path he had pointed out, her earlier fear replaced by determined momentum. Adelia's blue eyes widened as she studied the man in silence, then her cautious certainty surfaced in a low, gender-neutral voice. She asked whether he was one of the 12 swordmasters, her posture still rigid with suspicion and hope. As the man's silence continued, continues, Adelia keeps her gaze fixed on him and presses her question with restrained urgency. Her voice carries disbelief and fascination, as if she has finally found the kind of figure she has been chasing. Adelia's expression shifts from suspicion to focused conviction as she continues speaking. She reveals that she saw his swordsmanship in the underground arena, and her voice tightens with admiration for the impossible speed she could not follow. Adelia's resolve hardens as she admits she has been blocked by an insurmountable wall for years. She asks for sword tutelage with desperate sincerity, her desire for strength and revenge finally laid bare. Adelia stiffens when the man warns that his sword only takes lives, and she feels the pressure of his words before she can answer. Her sword hand flinches, fear briefly overtaking her confidence. Adelia hesitates in silence, suddenly afraid that enlightenment would mean nothing if she died immediately afterward. Her mouth parts as she struggles for an answer, but the pressure of the moment leaves her frozen. Adelia steadies herself after the hesitation, her pride tightening into resolve as she keeps her gaze fixed on the unseen man. She draws a careful breath and remains poised to answer, determined not to let the chance slip away in silence. Adelia opens her mouth to speak, but the man cuts her off before she can gather the courage to bargain. Her shoulders stiffen at the interruption, and her hand tightens on the sword as she absorbs the abrupt dismissal with a stunned, wounded expression. Adelia watches in disbelief as the man turns away and begins to leave, her confidence collapsing into panic at the possibility of losing the chance for enlightenment. She stands frozen for a moment, then her fingers loosen and tremble around the sword as regret surges in. Adelia's self-reproach deepens as she realizes her hesitation may have cost her everything she wanted. She lowers her chin, jaw tight, and stands rooted in place while the silence after his footsteps presses down on her. Adelia lifts her gaze as the man stops and turns back, his question catching her off guard and halting her retreat into embarrassment. She straightens in the alley, startled into attention, while his gesture toward a nearby training ground opens a new path before her. Adelia steadies herself in the alley, her fear easing into wary attention as she listens to the man's explanation. She remains silent, shoulders squared, while the realization settles that his swordsmanship and her pursuit have led her here for a reason. Adelia's expression sharpens with reluctant hope as she accepts that the man's brief display of sword mastery could explain her mistake. She keeps her posture upright, listening intently, while the alley's silence makes his claim feel more convincing and her own resolve more fragile. Adelia's guarded expression softens into captivated determination as she understands why the man's brief use of the swordmaster skill could have convinced her. She remains rooted in place, drawn forward by the promise of strength, ready to follow the path he has implied. Adelia's hesitation tightens into resolve as she lifts her chin and speaks with steady urgency. She admits that revenge drives her need for strength, and her blue eyes fix forward with a desperate, disciplined focus in the narrow alley. She continues speaking after a brief pause, her posture still rigid but her expression now openly earnest. Adelia explains that she has been blocked by an insurmountable wall for years, and the strain in her face reveals how badly she wants to move beyond it. Adelia's mouth firms as she finishes her plea, asking to be taught the sword. Her voice carries determination rather than hesitation now, and her stance shows that she is prepared to accept whatever answer follows. She holds her ground as the silence stretches, then steadies herself with a firmer breath. Adelia's expression hardens into a disciplined, almost painful resolve, showing that her request is not a whim but a desperate decision. Adelia finishes her confession with unwavering seriousness, saying she must become stronger for a desperate reason. Her gaze stays fixed ahead, and the alley feels even narrower as her resolve settles into a quiet, unbroken stillness. Adelia abruptly draws her sword before any reply can form, and the sudden steel sound leaves her expression cold and intent. She tightens both hands on the hilt, shoulders squared, as she fixes the blade toward the unseen protagonist with unwavering resolve. Without lowering the blade, Adelia speaks with controlled urgency and asks for only one exchange of blows. Her posture remains rigid, but her eyes sharpen with a desperate, disciplined focus as she seeks enlightenment through a single clash. Adelia continues her plea, insisting that one exchange will be enough for her to break through her wall. Her jaw sets as she holds the threatening line of the sword, and the intensity in her face reveals both resolve and impatience. As the silence from the unseen protagonist lingers, Adelia's confidence wavers for a brief instant. She keeps the sword raised, but her breathing tightens and her expression shifts from forceful insistence to uneasy anticipation. Adelia holds the stance a moment longer, waiting for an answer that does not come. Her face remains taut with determination, but the stillness around her makes the challenge feel heavier and more uncertain. Adelia keeps her sword raised and waits in rigid silence, but the lack of an answer makes her confidence tighten into unease. She stares ahead with a guarded, frustrated expression, still demanding the promised exchange while the alley remains still around her. Her posture shifts as she senses senses the danger in the silence, and her raised sword lowers a fraction. Adelia's expression hardens into wary hesitation, as if she has realized that the exchange she asked for may carry a cost she cannot ignore. Adelia remains frozen in place as the pressure of the moment settles over her, unable to advance or retreat. She keeps her sword ready, but her tense face shows that she is now measuring the risk of standing before a swordsman who speaks as if one mistake could be fatal. Adelia steadies her breathing and keeps her sword angled toward the unseen man, her fear tightening into stubborn resolve. She speaks through the tension, offering her limbs and life if that is what it takes to break through her wall and reach enlightenment. She continues without lowering the blade, voice calm but urgent as she insists she can sacrifice anything for the chance to advance. The determination in her face hardens, and her stance remains locked in place, as if she is forcing herself not to retreat. The silence from the other side leaves Adelia suspended between fear and resolve, but she does not lower her weapon. She holds her ground, waiting for the answer that will decide whether she can cross the wall in front of her. Adelia holds her ground in the alley, her resolve tightening as she weighs the man's answer against her desperate need for growth. His promise of enlightenment steadies her fear, and she remains poised to accept the duel-like test without lowering her sword. She absorbs the warning about life or death swordplay, and her confidence wavers for a brief instant. Even so, Adelia keeps her stance intact, torn between caution and the conviction that only this encounter can break her wall. The man cuts her hesitation short and turns away, forcing Adelia to confront the possibility of losing her chance. She freezes for a beat, then prepares to follow before the opportunity disappears completely. Adelia freezes in the alley as the cold warning settles over her, her confidence thinning into unease. She keeps her sword lowered at her side, shoulders tense, and stares toward the man's unseen face, absorbing the threat of a duel that could end in death. She lifts her gaze a little higher, her breath catching as the man's words force her to reconsider the exchange. Her posture remains guarded, but her eyes sharpen with fear and attention, as if measuring whether she can survive what she asked for. The man's head rises into view before her, and Adelia's attention locks onto his burning golden eyes. The sudden intensity strips away her hesitation, leaving her still and alert as she faces the possibility that his sword truly means death. Adelia stiffens under the pressure of that stare, her grip tightening as she realizes the warning is not a bluff. She remains rooted in place, caught between fear and the desire to keep following the man toward strength. She finally steadies herself, holding her ground as the moment hangs between them. Her expression hardens into wary resolve, ready to answer the life or death challenge even as the alley stays silent around her. Adelia's sword hand jerks once at the threat, and she freezes with her blade still angled forward. Her pride falters under the pressure, yet she keeps her feet planted, staring at the man's calm face with a tense, uneasy breath. She swallows her fear and holds the same stance, but her wrist trembles again as the challenge settles in. The realization that the man's indifference is more unsettling than hostility leaves her visibly shaken, though she refuses to lower her sword. Adelia remains motionless for a beat, then her breathing eases just enough to show she has not fled. She keeps facing the man off-screen, shaken but attentive, as the alley's silence presses her toward a decision. Adelia freezes in the alley, her blue eyes fixed ahead as fear tightens her throat. The promise of enlightenment loses its shine when she imagines dying immediately afterward, and her hesitation stretches into a heavy, unbearable silence. Her grip loosens by a fraction as the thought settles deeper. Adelia lowers her chin, conflicted and shaken, realizing that a breakthrough means nothing if it ends with her life cut short before she can use it. The silence drags on until Adelia can no longer find the courage to answer. She stays rooted in place, tense and frightened, as the moment of decision slips past her without a word. Adelia starts to speak, but the words die in her throat as the man cuts her off. Her stunned face tightens, and her trembling hand hovers near her sword while she watches him turn away without another glance. The man's footsteps recede into the alley, and Adelia remains frozen in place, her breath catching in a small, helpless sigh. She lowers her chin slightly, still staring after him, while her shaking hand betrays the shock she cannot yet hide. Adelia's expression stays blank for a beat longer as the realization settles in that he has already left her behind. She swallows, shoulders still stiff, and her trembling hand slowly lowers, leaving her standing alone in the alley's cold silence. Adelia's shoulders sag as her survival instinct drains away, and her blue eyes lower toward the alley floor. Frustration tightens her mouth while she silently condemns her own hesitation, standing alone in the dim street with her sword held slack at her side. Her expression tightens further as she clenches her jaw, ashamed that fear surfaced at the decisive moment. She draws a shallow breath, still rooted in place, and her grip firms on the sword while she stares ahead with renewed but wounded resolve. Before her self-blame can deepen, she steadies herself and turns her attention toward the direction he left. The alley remains empty, but her posture straightens as if preparing to move after him and accept the path he has opened. Adelia stands alone in the narrow alley, shoulders tense and chin lowered, still facing the direction he left. His sudden stop catches her off guard, and her frustration gives way to startled confusion as she listens for his next words. She turns her head toward him as his question lands, her brows lifting in disbelief. The rebuke she expected never comes. Instead, she freezes in place, caught between embarrassment and the hope that he is still willing to instruct her. As he gestures toward the opposite end of the alley, Adelia follows the line of his chin with her eyes. Her posture straightens, and the confusion on her face shifts into alert attention as she realizes he is directing her onward rather than dismissing her. She remains motionless for a beat, absorbing the unexpected invitation to continue. The mention of a nearby training ground replaces hesitation with cautious anticipation, and her gaze fixes on the route he indicated. Adelia finally commits to following him, her expression settling into determined focus. She shifts her weight forward, ready to move toward the training ground he has pointed out, no longer frozen by doubt. Adelia's dazed hesitation breaks into startled gratitude as she realizes he has accepted her request. She sheathes her sword with careful precision, straightens her clothes, and leans forward into a hurried chase, her relief sharpening into urgent determination. Adelia accelerates after him, her shoulders squared and her expression bright with resolve. She keeps one hand near her sword belt and the other swinging close to her side as she closes the distance down the alley, no longer doubting that she must stay at his back. Still energized by the acceptance, Adelia continues the pursuit without slowing, her face set in earnest resolve. She keeps her sword secured and her clothes in order as she follows the path he indicated, intent on not losing sight of him again. Adelia hurries deeper through the narrow alley, her earlier tension easing into focused relief as she keeps pace with the man ahead. She holds her sheathed sword close at her side, shoulders squared and posture upright, intent on following without losing a step. She slows and then stops, her expression shifting from excitement to alert curiosity as she notices the man's pause ahead. Adelia straightens her stance, keeping her sword secured, and leans slightly forward as if ready to receive his next instruction. Adelia follows closely through the back alleys and comes to a halt at the factory entrance. Her earlier eagerness settles into wary focus as she studies the ruined building, waiting for the next instruction before moving again. She shifts her weight and leans slightly forward, peering through the broken windows. The darkness inside and the thick dust around the entrance make her expression tighten, but she remains attentive and ready to move when told. At the man's command, Adelia squares her stance before the rusted gate. Her face hardens with disciplined resolve as she prepares to force the entrance open, accepting the task without hesitation. She gathers power into her body and drives a single heavy punch into the gate. The impact sends the iron surface buckling inward, and her expression stays fierce and controlled as the entrance gives way. As the gate loosens, Adelia lowers her fist and steadies her breathing, then studies the newly opened entrance with clear awe and anticipation. She remains poised at the threshold, ready to follow the protagonist into the hidden trial site. Adelia hesitates at the factory threshold, her skeptical expression tightening as she studies the ruined entrance. After the protagonist confirms it is the training ground, she closes her mouth and keeps her posture rigid, clearly unconvinced but listening. Adelia shifts her weight forward a fraction, still doubtful, and glances into the factory's darkness as if searching for proof. Her brows remain drawn, but she stays beside the entrance instead of retreating, absorbing the explanation in tense silence. Adelia falls quiet, her skeptical look settling into wary acceptance as she remains at the entrance. She keeps her gaze fixed ahead, shoulders squared, ready to follow the protagonist deeper into the hidden trial site. Adelia remains at the factory threshold, her skepticism easing into focused attention as she listens to the explanation. She keeps her posture upright and guarded, ready to follow the next instruction while the hidden trial and its reward become clear to her. Adelia shifts her weight forward and studies the factory interior more carefully, her doubt giving way to alert curiosity. She prepares to move deeper inside, visibly taking the claim about a hidden trial seriously as the protagonist's certainty settles over the scene. Adelia holds her position at the entrance, now fully attentive as the explanation concludes with the sacred piece hidden inside the trial. Her expression is controlled and serious, as if she has accepted that this ruined factory is the first step toward real strength. Adelia pauses at the factory entrance, her skepticism tightening into concentration as she watches the rusted gate block the way. The heavy silence makes the obstacle feel deliberate, and she remains alert beside the protagonist's failed attempt to open it. Adelia shifts her stance closer to the gate, reading the protagonist's inability to move it as proof that brute force is required. Her expression hardens with practical resolve, and she prepares to act without hesitation. Adelia commits to the task, stepping into position to break the entrance open as the protagonist's plan becomes clear. The protagonist gives the order, and Adelia answers at once, tightening her focus focus before the rusted gate. Her expression hardens with disciplined resolve as she prepares her body for force rather than hesitation. A whoosh of power rises around On. She gathers aura into her frame. She remains still, but her posture grows denser and more coiled, as if every muscle is being wrapped in controlled pressure. The aura thickens into a vivid halo, and Adelia lowers her center of gravity in preparation. Her face stays calm, but the set of her jaw shows complete commitment to the strike she is about to deliver. Adelia shifts her weight forward, the gathered aura pulsing brighter around her shoulders and fists. She remains poised at the edge of motion, her body aligned for a direct, overwhelming blow. The charged aura settles into concentrated brilliance around Adelia's body, signaling the instant before impact. Her stance remains unwavering, and the factory entrance waits directly before her in the tense silence. Adelia tightened her focus as the teal gold-blue aura condensed around her right fist, her expression cold and intent. She planted her feet beside the rusted gate, shoulders coiled, and drew her torso into a twisting strike aimed straight through the iron barrier. She drove her right shoulder forward and snapped her hips through the motion, releasing the punch with overwhelming force. Her jaw set hard as the fist crossed the final span to the gate, and the aura flared brighter at the moment of contact. The iron mass buckled inward under the blow, and Adelia held her posture through the recoil without losing balance. Her fist remained buried in the crumpled metal for a beat, her face stern and unblinking as the gate yielded. As the hinges groaned, Adelia eased her weight back a fraction and watched the barrier begin to separate. Her breathing stayed steady, and the stern set of her mouth softened only slightly as the entrance started to give way. The door continued to swing open under its own damaged weight, and Adelia remained poised beside it, ready to proceed. Her eyes tracked the widening entrance with calm confidence, the force of her strike still evident in her steady stance. Adelia shifted her weight forward and angled her body toward the opening, her expression still sharp with concentration. She kept her hands ready at her sides as she prepared to follow the path her blow had cleared. She paused at the threshold for a brief moment, satisfied that the entrance had been forced open cleanly. Her posture stayed upright and disciplined, the lingering intensity in her face matching the quiet aftermath of the impact. Adelia held her position beside the opened factory entrance, ready for the next instruction. Her calm, determined gaze stayed fixed on the dark interior, while the battered gate hung open behind her as proof of her overwhelming strength. Adelia remained at the factory entrance after the impact, her posture still and controlled as she faced left into the dark opening. The protagonist silently measured her level 77 strength, and his admiration sharpened into a private resolve to forge his own body through effort rather than reliance on his skill. He kept watching the ruined lock and the bent gate, silently comparing that overwhelming force to his own frail body. The contrast left him uneasy and determined, and he accepted that he would need to strengthen even his most basic physical abilities before relying on anything else. Adelia held her ground at the threshold while the protagonist's thoughts turned toward long-term growth inside the hidden trial. His silent frustration gave way to determination, and the factory entrance became the first step toward rebuilding his weak body. Adelia stood at the opened factory threshold and watched the dark interior with a tightened jaw, her earlier force settling into focused resolve. She accepted that this ruined place would be the first step toward lasting strength, and her expression hardened with determined anticipation. She shifted her weight forward and stepped into the factory, choosing action over hesitation as the hidden trial became her immediate path. Her gaze stayed level and intent, carrying a quiet eagerness to claim the sacred piece and begin real growth. Deeper inside, Adelia paused and squared her shoulders, fully committing herself to the dungeon's trial and the long-term future it promised. Her expression held disciplined confidence, as if she had already chosen to endure whatever the hidden challenge demanded.